Let us rendezvous together, men. Mountain man skills for the modern man. That's what we're going to talk about today. Throwing tomahawks, making fire. Man stuff. This is the Alpha Male podcast, right? So let's get mountain manly today. On Alpha Male podcast, a podcast where we talk about what it means to be a man, made in the image of our Creator, God Almighty, strong, dominant, in control, and we do not apologize for that here. With that, I'll do a different bio than the normal plug-in. First and foremost, a Christian. God is one. God should be number one in everything that I do, and this podcast is no different. Military and law enforcement veteran, state rifle and pistol champion, commander of a tactical team to stop active shooters, and many other more modern tactical stuff. But there's something that I used to do that sparked this episode. Today on the Insider Patreon chat, which you'd know if you were a patron, and thank you to everyone that is a patron, we were talking about different things, and I forget who brought it up. But one of the guys in the chats was also into mountain man rendezvous. That's something that I used to actually do. I think just kind of get away from, this was when I was a full-time law enforcement officer doing regular assignments, more specialized assignments, and one of my good gunfighting buddies, like a true gunfighter, who is no longer with us, but a good man, and I was honored to know him. Anyway, he got me into doing these mountain man rendezvous, and they are really cool. And one of the guys in the chat, I guess, did them as well. I don't know if he still does or he did in the past, but that's what we're going to talk about today, and how that can apply to a modern man, the benefits that you can get from primitive skills. I use the term bushcraft because that's what people call it today, and I want people to understand what I'm talking about, but when I think bushcraft, I generally think of dudes in their backyards with some giant, really expensive knife, turning a big log into little logs. There's nothing wrong with that. Many of the skills today we're going to talk about should fit into that kind of genre, but long before I ever heard the term bushcraft, I did the mountain man rendezvous. It's basically a get-together to practice the skills of our forefathers, primitive American mountain man skills, 1700s technology and earlier, up into like early 1800s technology. Basically, you get a bunch of dudes, and women and children are welcome too, but generally you get a bunch of mountain men together in a wild place doing primitive, wild things. And like what I would consider more manly things. Stuff like shooting competitions, black powder shooting competitions, archery competitions, hatchet throwing and knife throwing competitions. Getting dressed up in the period clothing, living in the primitive ways, in tabernacles, temporary dwellings, whether it's a teepee or a tent or whatever. I guess I'm getting ahead of myself. We'll get into more of the specific things that the modern man can glean from these mountain man rendezvous. If it intrigues you, you should probably look into it, but I'll get into some of the things. Whether or not you do a mountain man rendezvous, you may want to just do stuff like this on your own and see the benefit of it, see if it bears fruit for you. So let's get into the meat and potatoes of the episode. Primitive skills for modern survivalists. I'm going to start out with one of my favorite ones. If we learned anything from Napoleon Dynamite, it's that girls only want guys with sweet skills. Well, I'm going to lay out some sweet skills for you here. How about tomahawk skills? Right? If tomahawk just doesn't scream manly, got a tomahawk in your hand, you're like, low T, never heard of her. Let's go throw some war weapons through the air. Anyway, hatchet throwing, hawk throwing, it's a thing at Mountain Man Rendezvous. It's perhaps one of my favorite things. I am here holding my hawk. So one of the things I really enjoyed doing was tomahawk throwing. That is a pretty cool skill. Not just the throwing itself, but Variably, you spend enough time with a tomahawk, you'll start doing other stuff with it. It's obviously a really good melee weapon. It keeps coming up over and over again in history from, the Franks, the Vikings, all manner of savage northern western European barbarians to the Native Americans in the New World, right? It keeps showing up in history because it's a good weapon. It's a good melee weapon. They also do knife throwing, which is pretty cool if you want to get into that. Obviously, a knife is, you probably listen to enough episodes to know that I'm big on EDC, and I say if you're a man, you should have a knife, right? If you're awake and out and about, why do you not have a knife? So, get a little bit more utility. I'm not saying that, a throwing hatchet or a throwing knife, you should probably know that I in no way think that's a stand-in for a modern defensive handgun as a CCW or a truck gun like a shotgun or a rifle. However, it's definitely some useful skills. It definitely increases the, let's say, flexibility of both of those melee weapons, tools, whatever they're going to be. Another one that is kind of adjacent to the rendezvous, I don't think they have any competitions or anything, but making alcohol. That was definitely something part of the rendezvous. And now, I'm not saying you should or shouldn't drink, right? I've got nothing against drinking. I personally almost never drink unless it's a sip of, like, communion wine. But Jesus drank, right? That may offend you depending on what Christian sect, denomination you are, but Jesus drank. His first miracle was turning water into wine, not grape juice, wine. He was accused of being a glutton and a drunkard, of which he was not, but he drank. Right, so I got no problem with drinking. Some men are called to drink and some are not. John the Baptist didn't drink. Samson was told not to drink. Right? Nazirite is a thing. So some men are called to drink and some men are not. Anyway, that to say, I got no problem with alcohol. If you do, then don't do it. But I generally don't even drink. But I do like to make alcohol. Now, alcohol has many uses. One of its really practical uses throughout history is making unsafe water to drink a safe beverage to drink, right? Long before they understood like bacteria and alcohol kills bacteria and fermentation. Long before any of that, they knew that for really in dirty environments like a big chunk of Europe for a big chunk of our history, with all those people, and this is another lesson, population density matters, but with all the people and all the bacteria and stuff, it was often the safe thing to drink was alcohol. Anyway, alcohol has many uses depending on what you do with it and how you make it, but the making of alcohol, it's so easy, it's so basic, you can make it by accident. I'm not telling you what's safe to drink or not to drink. There's probably it's totally legal to make your own alcohol. I'm not telling you what is or what is not safe to drink, but here's what I will tell you from making alcohol. If it goes wrong, you will know, right? You know what alcoholic beverages smell like probably. If you open it and it makes you want to vomit, that's not alcohol. That's rotten apples or whatever you made the alcohol with. You can make alcohol out of so many different things. Talking about the primitive alcohol, you can, obviously the common ones, right? Grapes, potatoes, grain, like wheat, barley. But you can get into all kinds of cool stuff. Dandelions, mead. If you want to get like Viking with it. Make it with honey, make it with cherries, make it with blackberries. Are all over the place, in most climates. And a lot of times there's a ton of them. So anyway, make an alcohol. Even if you don't drink, if you know somebody that does and they're not suffering like with alcoholism and they enjoy drinking, you make it for them. I like making alcohol and I generally don't drink. In fact, I think the last time I had a beer, I don't even know if I finished it, was years and years ago. My last formal school in the Army, one of my good buddies, he was like, if we get through this, have a beer with me. And I said, okay. This is not going to hurt me, right? I may or may not have finished that one beer. I don't even remember. That was years ago. To tell you how much I drank. But I got no moral problem with drinking. But if you want to learn how to make alcohol, there's probably people at the rendezvous that do it or can help you with it. I'm not promising that. It depends on the rendezvous, but definitely adjacent to that. How about fire? Talk about a practical, timeless man skill. Making fire. I'm not talking about taking out a Bic lighter. Remember, this is, 1700s, early 1800s tech. I'm talking about making a fire without that, making a fire with flint and steel. Probably the most common, flint and steel. Flint and steel, obviously the more primitive methods, friction fires, but making a fire, and again, with primitive tech. So even if you get the spark with the flint and steel, you're not using shredded paper. You have to find the wild tinder or make char cloth or gunpowder cloth or any of those things. Right? That's a really good skill. Whether or not you want to be a mountain man. It's good to be able to start a fire without a lighter, without matches. Right? That's a good skill. You should definitely be able to start a fire with a lighter. And I'm not saying you shouldn't carry a lighter or carry something to start fires. I'd be a hypocrite. Part of my EDC is a ferrocerium rod. It's kind of a modern take on flint and steel now that I think about it. I absolutely carry a way to start a fire. But what if I don't have that? If you understand how to get a fire going pretty regularly with that kind of technology and natural tinder, whether it be dried moss or punk wood or char cloth, and you get progressively larger fire material and know how to feed the fire oxygen, if you can do that, then it's pretty easy to make a fire pretty quickly in an emergency if you have, let's say, a lighter and a bunch of fast food trash, right? You think that's a simple thing if you're used to making fires, but not all men today, sadly, could make a fire, I think. So fire is one of those things, like, you kind of got to practice it. It's a perishable skill. You might understand the principle, but absolutely with like natural materials, fire building, fire maintaining, that's a skill. Going on, one of probably my favorite thing, and the thing that got me really hooked into the rendezvous, the mountain man stuff, was the black powder shooting, the primitive weapons shooting. I like black powder. I forget how old I was. I was a young boy when I took my first deer with a muzzle loading rifle back in Virginia, growing up as a poor boy in the South. But I do like muzzle loading. I do like black powder. I like a lot of aspects of it. But again, I'm not telling you to get rid of your CCW. I'm not telling you to get rid of your M17 or your SIG 226 and start carrying a 50 caliber black powder trapper on your hip. I'm not telling you to throw away your AR-15 and get a 50 cal Hawken rifle. What I'm telling you is you can learn things and sharpen things like your follow through, which generally has to be pretty good with a flintlock rifle because the lock time is a lot longer. So your follow through should be just on point, right? You apply that to something with a lot lower lock time, sharpening your fundamentals. You want to get decent at cleaning dirty rifles? Shoot black powder because they get filthy. And black powder is corrosive, so you better be on top of it. So that's another just adjacent skill. Like, you could shoot an AR hundreds of rounds and put it away and not clean it for 6 months, and you're probably okay. You shoot a black powder rifle 3 or 4 times, and you had better clean it. So you want to get good at like rifle maintenance, cleaning out rifles, making moose milk out of ballistol, etc. Black powder shooting, and it's a lot of fun. Also, getting good with shooting iron sights. You would be amazed at how accurately you can shoot one of those primitive rifles with iron sights. It's kind of amazing. That should give you a lot more confidence when you're, let's say, shooting a man-sized silhouette with an AR with iron sights at 300 meters. You're like, pfft. What is that compared to a Hawken rifle, 50 caliber black powder gun? Right? So there's a lot of application there. Even if, again, I'm not telling you to get rid of your modern guns and just get black powder guns. But I think it's good to understand where the technology has come from and how far it's gotten, and maybe give you a greater appreciation for modern weapons. And again, fundamentals are the fundamentals. The fundamentals are the same for a black powder flintlock rifle or a percussion rifle as they are for an AR-15. The fundamentals are the same. Your stance may be slightly different or whatever, but it's a good skill to have, and it's good to understand how they work. Also, you get into the period clothing thing. There's a lot of that there, and a lot of the adjacent stuff is like people making stuff and things like that. You might learn a little bit about leather working and working hides, like animal hides. And maybe that's something you want to get into in a more modern context, right? Leather working. I'm not telling you to show up at your next board meeting with coyote skin hat. and a tomahawk. That'd be pretty cool, though. Just tell them I told you to do it. You'll be okay. But, learning how to work with leather, and I think every person should know how to sew. I think sewing on Alpha Male Podcast, you know how many times I've sewed? You know what happens when you're deployed in a war zone and you rip your trousers? You sew them up. You can't call your mommy. She ain't coming to sew them up. Look at any packing list for any, combat unit. I bet sewing kit's on there. But, that's taking it to the next level, making stuff out of leather. So anyway, if that's something you're interested in, you might want to pick that up. Come in handy one day if we're the road style years into the apocalypse and you got to repair your shoes. You might think, I've got an old antler, I've got some dental floss, I can make a needle, I can fix these boots. Right? That's probably not the most likely, but and just maybe something you enjoy, working with your hands. On that, the footwear and keeping dry. And that skill and some of the other ones I'm about to mention, they came from the other guy in the chat. The first ones were a list I came up with. I want to give credit where credit is due. Thank you to all the patrons, and thank you, Luke, for this. Again, if you wanted to be on this stuff, become a patron. We talk about stuff like this all the time. I put out my list, and I was like, hey, who's got some more to throw on here? And Luke, thankfully, and thank you, Luke, he put on their footwear and keeping dry. Absolutely, right? We're talking about primitive tech. You're out in that primitive clothing, and it starts raining, starts snowing, right? If you can, and translate that, right? I'm not telling you to have doe-skin moccasins for the apocalypse. What I'm saying, if you can figure out how to keep your feet dry in doe-skin footwear, probably keep them dry with Thinsulate muck boots. If you understand different kind of materials next to your feet and moisture wicking and all that kind of stuff, right? It's a very transferable thing. Here's a big one. This is something I really love to do, mostly because my wife really loves it. And anything I can do kind of survivally related with my wife, she really likes foraging. It just astounds me at how much she likes it. She likes foraging like I like killing beasts and putting them on the table. You're probably not hunting at a rendezvous because it's probably not legal the time of years that they have it. But you can probably forage if you go around the surrounding areas. And foraging, especially because there's probably, if you're a little bit trepidatious, is that the right word? Yeah. If you're a little bit trepidatious about foraging, you're just not sure if you should eat this thing, right? At a rendezvous, there's probably 2 or 3 witnesses there that are like, yeah, you can eat that. Don't eat that. Yeah, that looks delicious and like a tomato, but that's nightshade and it'll kill you. There are some really pretty red berries that are delicious. There's some little pretty red berries that will kill you. Right, so if you want to get into foraging, you might do it in this environment where you can pick some stuff and walk around and say, hey, what is this? I found this. Can I eat this? You might be like, yeah, you can eat it, or no, it'll kill you. Or no, you can't eat it, but you can make tea with it. Or yeah, you can eat it, but you're really going to have to go to the bathroom. So if you are constipated, then there you go. Right, there are probably people there that will know those things because they're probably into those sort of things. So foraging, if you're not already into foraging, even if you mostly go to the store and buy your food at Walmart or wherever people buy food at, right? Saying you got to live like me and my wife and be neo-nomads and travel and do a bunch of hunting and foraging. But what I'm saying is it's a good skill to have. And even if you don't need the calories like that, it's just rewarding to go out and get your own food with your own hands by the grace of God. That's just a really rewarding thing. Here's another one. Primitive cooking. It's one thing to turn on the stove, and if you can't cook regular, if you just go out to get fast food, fix that first. But if you want to take your cooking to the next level, cooking over an open fire is absolutely a great skill to have. You think cooking's not manly? Slay a beast yourself, cut a big old hunk of backstrap out of it, and throw it on a fire. If you do it right, you can have a great meal. What you need for a great meal, you need to kill a beast, take a good chunk of meat, throw it on fire. Make fire, throw meat on fire, eat meat. Delicious, manly meal. That's manly cooking. You don't really need anything else. It's harder that way, but you can certainly do it if you know what you're doing in the coal bed and whatever. You can just throw the meat on the fire once it's at the right temperature. Maybe not the best, maybe a little bit of charcoal on there. Hey, I don't mind that. Learning how to cook on an open fire, it's quite the skill to. It's one of those things, like you could probably throw a piece of meat in a fire and it will be cooked, for lack of a better term. But getting it to come out well, that can take a lot of skill. Or it's cooking with cast iron, cooking over the very basic, metal mesh wire grill, or wrought iron, or, Dutch oven cooking. And there's something rewarding about slow food, like not fast food, like not where you just get it and shove it in your face, and then before you even realize it, you're done and driving away. Like where you sit and wait and anticipate and talk with your friends and wait for a good meal. And I'm skipping ahead, that we'll talk about that more later. But as much as we think, fast food, what an innovation. Is it? How about slow food? How about where it takes hours to cook a meal? Don't you think we're missing out on that today? So absolutely, primitive cooking. Basic stuff. Luke put in there bannock. You could add in there jerky, smoking meat, pemmican, right? It's real primitive, basic stuff. Hardtack, sea biscuits. Now, okay, the guy he's Canadian. He put in there maple syrup. So I don't think if you make your own maple syrup, it will turn you Canadian. I don't think that you'll want to have an inclination to say sorry and head over the border. But I'm just warning you, he is Canadian. So he said maple syrup. But in all seriousness, that's something I've never done, but I've actually thought about doing that. I've wanted to actually get into that. Not making maple syrup per se, but getting a spile and tapping into a tree. One, because it's a way to get clean, drinkable liquid if you can't get it any other way. And it might just be good for cooking. Like, you can get more syrup than just maple syrup. It's the most common way. You can get, like, birch syrup and things like that. I've used, like, pine tar and things like that for other things, which is its own primitive skill, making your own glue. But that's a kind of a cool skill, right? Making your own syrup or just making your own water, like maple water. That's a thing. So that's a skill that I actually don't possess that maybe I should figure out. And he put on there coffee and tea making. And obviously not with a coffee pot, right? Not from Starbucks, not in the drive-thru with the triple shot of espresso, caramel macchiato. Talking about fire that you made a metal container, maybe a percolator, which is something I actually really like percolators. Maybe just cowboy coffee, right? Just learning how to make cowboy coffee. And again, there's something for the slow cooking. There's something about making the coffee and not just driving up and pulling up and drinking it, and by the time you get to work, it's gone and you've forgotten all about it and didn't enjoy the taste of it. But like sitting around a fire that you made, waiting for that coffee, smelling the coffee, pouring the coffee, I think there's something to that. And he put tea, granted again, Canadian, part of the British Empire. I want to like tea. I've tried so many times to like tea. I'm not a big tea person. I'm not really a coffee person either. I drink decaf coffee because I love the taste, but I try to stay away from caffeine. But I've tried to like tea. I always think I'm going to like it. It always smells good, and I just don't like it. Green tea in the summer, cold. Okay, I can deal with that. I'll even drink tea sometimes, but I don't know that I like it any more than water. But hey, if you like tea, absolutely. Maybe even learn how to make your own tea. Part of foraging, right? I do like collecting mint. I have some wild mint hanging out above the sink right now for making stuff. So if you want to make your own herbal teas, right, that's definitely something you could get into. Oh, and on that note, he didn't put this in there, but this is something I thought of, and something I like to do is collect chicory. Chicory is like a coffee substitute. Consider it like the American poor man coffee. Obviously, coffee and tea is not something we grow here, but chicory does grow, and chicory, you can collect it and forage for it. You can eat it, which is, I like it. I like bitter green herbs, but you can absolutely eat it, or you can get the roots and roast it and make a coffee substitute. So that's just a bonus skill for you there. And here is what I'm going to close with, and we've alluded to it several times, but the big skill I want to talk about is just getting out of the box life, out of the cubicle life, from the cube that you live in to the cube that you work in to the cube that you drive back and forth into the real world, right? Being outside. The heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament shows us his handiwork. And I do mean firmament. Psalm 19. Getting out under the stars, looking at the two great lights, the greater to rule the day and the lesser to rule the night, realizing that God created all that, and He created you too, and He loves you. It's getting outside and getting away from all these electronics. I'm not saying electronics are evil by nature. They certainly are used for evil. But I'm saying, couldn't we all use a little bit more time unplugged from electronics? Getting away and doing something other than electronic-based, something other than social media, something other than all that stuff, something other than the hum of a electric motor or the vibration of a gasoline engine. Just the peace and quiet of nature. And another thing, and this is, I didn't mention the bio, but I mentioned it in some of the other ones, I've also been a professional big game hunter and guide. And one of the things I really miss, I do miss slaying beasts and helping people provide for their own food, but another thing I really miss is sitting around a fire with a bunch of like-minded people and talking around a fire. It's very human. It's very rewarding. It's very enjoyable in a good, clean, wholesome way. Couldn't we all in 2024 use some more of that? Talk all you want about the hardcore survival skills, man. Throw a tomahawk. Kill a rabbit with a stick. But what about quality of life? What about taking time to smell the roses? Walking through the grass. Getting food with your own hands. Sitting by a fire and laughing with a group of people. Making connections. Actually having meaningful face-to-face conversation. That might be one of the most important things you could get out of, primitive skills. How many of our forefathers in days of yore sat around a fire, ate meat, and drank, and talked? God said, it is not good for man to be alone. And I wonder if, even though there may be more human beings on the earth than there have ever been, if we are not more lonely now than we have ever been. Just because you have electronics and cubes and climate control and all that stuff, that doesn't mean that they have to control you. That's part of being a man, is having dominion, being in control. Can apply to a tomahawk. That can apply to an iPhone. You should be in control of the thing. The thing should not be in control of you. Anyway, with that, we'll start wrapping up the show here. I appreciate all that you do. If you want to become a patron, consider becoming one. There should be a link in the show notes. I already gave a couple verses today and already talked a lot about things that you can do. So I'll just close with a verse and talking about being out in nature. I already talked about Psalm 19. How about the beginning? How about the beginning? In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth the earth was without form and void, and darkness covered the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God hovered over the face of the water. And God said, "Let there be light." And light was. And God separated the light from the darkness. And the light he called day, and the darkness he called night. And there was evening, and there was morning on the first day.